When Rossini died in 1868, Verdi had the idea of assembling a Requiem for him. So Verdi went to his publisher, Ricordi, and suggested that they put together a committee and ask 12 composers, plus Verdi, making 13, to write a movement each as a Requiem for Rossini. And the idea was it was to be performed on the anniversary of Rossini's death. Now, everything went swimmingly. The composers wrote their pieces. They actually gave the pieces for free, and the idea was that they would contribute to the performance. And we got quite near the performance when things went wrong. There was talk of delaying it. There was talk of where were they going to perform it. And Verdi, in quite an angry letter, said, "I'm not having any delay. It must be performed when I say so, and I don't want that conductor conducting it." So at that point, the whole project floundered. And until the 1970s, when a musicologist found the manuscripts and put together the piece as it had been written, this piece then, the Requiem for Rossini, had remained unknown, as it were, except for the Verdi bit, because Verdi got his manuscript back, and I'll talk in a minute about what Verdi did with his bit. But you know, if we think about 12 composers writing in the 1860s in Italy, can we name any of them? And I do want to read them out because it's a fascinating list. Buzzoli, Bazzini, Pedrotti, Cagnoni, Ricci, Nini, Boucheron, Coccia, Gaspari, Platania, Rossi, and Mabellini. And it just occurs to us how much music of that period we just don't know. Verdi, of course, was at the height of his powers. Aida was written in 1871 and is one of his great operas. And this Libera Me, because Verdi had decided to set the last movement of the Requiem for Rossini, was lying in the drawer unused and unperformed. Now, in 1873, the great Italian writer Manzoni died. And Verdi was very moved by that death. He was a friend of Manzoni's. Manzoni was a very significant artist. The novel I Promessi Sposi is one of the great novels of the 19th century. Perhaps Manzoni is the Victor Hugo or the Dickens of Italy. And Verdi then remembered that he had this Libera Me in his drawer and got the manuscript out and set about writing a Requiem in memory of Manzoni. And for many years, the Requiem was known as the Manzoni Requiem. I think when Verdi wrote his Libera Me, he was in a way showing off. It was going to be the last movement of this Requiem for Rossini. And Verdi seems to throw everything at the text, a dramatic soprano who sings at the beginning, and then the chorus singing the same words but in hushed, plain song, sort of chordal way. And that's followed by the words Dies Irae, and that begins very turbulently and violently, the day of anger, the day of warning. And that's followed by then a very quiet section where the soprano sings above the unaccompanied chorus, singing the words Requiem Aeternam. And then the whole thing is finished off by a very giant fugue. Now, having mentioned those words Requiem Aeternam and Dies Irae, you'll probably realize that those words crop up much earlier in a Requiem Mass. In fact, the first movement is the Requiem Aeternam text. And so Verdi was able to take music he'd already written for his Libera Me and use it earlier on in the piece. And that gives the piece a sense of wonderful unity. So music that you hear at the beginning comes in the final movement. The Dies Irae movement begins with crashing chords. And if you listen to a recording of the original Libera Me, those chords aren't there. So Verdi is rather subtly rewriting the Libera Me movement that he had written already. And then at the end, as I say, we get this fantastic fugue. Now, I always think we don't associate fugue with Verdi. He's an opera composer after all. But you probably are going to say, well, what about Falstaff? That ends with a fugue. And there's a rather good fugue, too, in his string quartet. And so the Verdi Requiem is a towering masterpiece which went around the world quite quickly. Performances in London actually were not quite so successful because the Catholic stance of that didn't quite suit the British public. But as a concert piece, it's remained in the repertory to this day and is one of the most dramatic and operatic of the things that a chorus can possibly sing.